This is TWiT.
Last Friday, Mozilla posted a complaint to the industry under the heading Competition. The title of this posting was Platform Tilt, documenting the uneven playing field for an independent browser like Firefox. Okay, so here's what Mozilla wrote. They said, correctly, browsers are the principal gateway connecting people to the open internet, acting as their agent and shaping their experience. The central role of browsers has long motivated us to build and improve Firefox in order to offer people an independent choice. However, the centrality of the browser creates a strong incentive for dominant players to control the browser that people use. The right way to win users is to build a better product, but shortcuts can be irresistible. And there's a long history of companies leveraging their control of devices and operating systems to tilt the playing field in favor of their own browser. This tilt manifests in a variety of ways. For example, making it harder for a user to download and use a different browser, ignoring or resetting a user's default browser preference, restricting capabilities to the first-party browser, or requiring the use of the first-party browser engine for third-party browsers. For years, Mozilla has engaged in dialogue with platform vendors in an effort to address these issues. With renewed public attention and an evolving regulatory environment, we think it's time to publish these concerns using the same transparent process and tools we use to develop positions on emerging technical standards. So today, we're publishing a new issue tracker where we intend to document the ways in which platforms put Firefox at a disadvantage. We wish to engage with the vendors of those platforms to resolve these issues. This tracker captures the issues we experienced developing Firefox, but we believe in an even playing field for everyone, not just us. We encourage other browser vendors to publish their concerns in a similar fashion and welcome the engagement and contributions of other non-browser groups interested in these issues. We're particularly appreciative of the efforts of open web advocacy in articulating the case for a level playing field and for documenting self-preferencing. People deserve choice, and choice requires the existence of viable alternatives. Alternatives and competition are good for everyone, but they can only flourish if the playing field is fair. It's not today, but it's also not hard to fix if the platform vendors wish to do so. We call on Apple, Google, and Microsoft to engage with us in this new forum to speedily resolve these issues. Okay, now, of course, many of us prefer to use Firefox as our browser of choice. I have Chrome and Edge, but URL clicks are always sent to Firefox.
Me too.
It's
on all my
my
machines,
default browser.
Yeah.
And I have Firefox installed on all my various Apple iOS devices.
Oh, see, I haven't gone that far. They really don't make that easy. And you're not really using Firefox.
Exactly. So I dug a bit deeper into this new issue tracking system, and it was quickly apparent that Apple had the most strikes against it. At this moment, Mozilla is complaining about Apple Store forbids third-party browser engines, support for third-party multi-process applications on iOS, JIT, just-in-time compilation support on iOS, accessibility APIs on iOS, messages integration, importing browser data, setting and checking default browser, origin-based associated domains-dependent features for third-party browser engines, browser extension support, and beta testing support on iOS. Now, we know how heavy-handed Apple is. I'm an avid user of Amazon's Kindle readers and also of Amazon's Kindle app on iOS, where I use it on iPads and my iPhone. And it is a constant and ridiculous annoyance that Apple refuses to allow Amazon users to purchase books through the Amazon app.
Absolutely.
It is so dumb. It's necessary to use a web browser. Why? Because Apple has iBooks and cannot stand the competition.
Well, they would let Amazon do it, but they would get 30% for it. And Cory Doctorow was talking about this on Sunday. The margins on the books, the ebooks, is lower than 30%. So Amazon would have to give them all the profit and then some.
Right.
So it's just not going to happen.
It's just dumb. So I'm sure that Apple's reticence to allow Chrome and Firefox and any other and all other non-Safari browsers to enjoy the same privileges they have on other platforms is largely about security. I mean, I get it. As we know, browsers have become the number one way for evildoers to crawl inside our computers. So I don't blame Apple for that. But given my experience, elsewhere and with Apple, I also have no doubt that some of this is just pettiness, which, as I said, should be beneath Apple. For what it's worth, though, I'm sure Apple is not, singling out Firefox for prejudicial treatment. They treat anything that's not Safari as suspect.
Yeah, exactly.
Mozilla is also unhappy with their experience over on Google's Android platform. There, they voiced 3 complaints: importing browser data on Android, some Android features launch Chrome instead of the user's default browser, and lower quality search results in third-party browser engines on Android. I was curious to look into these 3 a bit further, especially the last one, which we'll get to in a second. What I found was interesting. In detailing their complaint about importing browser data on Android, Mozilla explained, browsing information like history, bookmarked sites, and cookies is not accessible to third-party browsers on Android. This data is kept within a web browser applications data directory, which is not directly accessible to third-party browsers, and there's no API or content provider to enable it to be imported. While this is sensitive data, Mozilla agrees, similar import functionality is possible on all major desktop platforms, and Android is able to mediate access to other sensitive data with user consent. Not being able to import data creates significant friction to change from Chrome. A user should be allowed to bring their data with them to another browser. And I think that seems like a legitimate complaint and a slippery way for Google to give Chrome an anti-competitive edge over any other browser its user might wish to switch to. And the second issue raised, some Android features launch Chrome instead of the user's default browser. That seems even more insidious. Mozilla explains, features like Google Search or Discover in the pre-installed Google application ignore the user's default browser choice. Links to websites outside of the application are always opened in Chrome, regardless of the default browser. This is a widely used application, they say, Mozilla says, with additional entry points from built-in features such as the search bar on the home screen and app launcher. Each time it opens a link in Chrome, a user is driven away from their default browser. All built-in applications and affordances that open external links should open them in the user's default browser. Right. That would really annoy me. And this issue will be quite familiar to anyone who's heard Paul Thurrott ranting about Microsoft and Edge doing the same thing.
You breathe on it at launches. Yeah.
Yes.
What, me? You want me? You want me? Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
As Mozilla says, every time Chrome is launched, when the user has installed Firefox and asked Android to use it, drives the user toward Chrome, despite their clearly expressed browser preference. And it was the third item in Mozilla's platform tilt list of grievances that most caught my eye. They wrote lower quality search result pages in third-party browser engines on Android. That seemed like a real antitrust showstopper. Here's what Mozilla explained. They said the web search experience is tightly integrated with a number of built-in features in Android, and the experience provided to Firefox is inferior compared to the version provided for Chrome. As seen in the screenshots, identical search terms show less information and receive a lower quality design in Firefox on Android. And for anyone who's interested, I have the side-by-side screenshot in the show notes. Where is it? On page 6 of the show notes, where indeed you can see that Chrome has a fancy-looking display, and Firefox not so much. It's kind of got a little textual summary instead of some nicer graphics.
You can't do graphics in Firefox. It doesn't. You can only do it in a proper browser,
Mozilla said, while strictly speaking, this is an issue with the Google search website. Given the prominence and integration of search on Android, this is a meaningful user experience gap that creates an incentive for users to not choose a third-party browser.
They've got a really good point. I mean, this is the same data coming from the same site, a Google site, but they intentionally poorly render it on anything but Chrome.
Yes, and you know why? It's the user agent header. It turns out that Google's search results are based or biased against non-Chrome browsers.
That's terrible. Terrible.
It is so wrong. If the user agent string is changed, then Google will provide the same improved experience to Firefox users as Chrome users. Now, user agent dependency is nothing new, and once upon a time, Chrome's page results rendering may have necessitated producing different results to differing browsers, but those days, those are long gone. This sort of deliberate bias is showing Google's own extreme pettiness. And speaking of Microsoft and Windows, Microsoft's own incestuous ties to its own web browser actually, as we know, have been the subject of antitrust lawsuits in the past, and big ones. Mozilla lists 3 complaints about Microsoft's and Windows treatment of Firefox, and you can imagine where this is going. The 3 complaints are setting default browser on Windows, default browser is set to Edge by several Windows flows, and some Windows features launch Edge instead of the user's default browser. It is, starting to sound like a refrain. Under setting default browser on Windows, Mozilla writes, allowing a third-party browser to programmatically set itself as the default is an important platform feature. Without this, even after the user has installed the browser of their choice, they must navigate operating system settings and make the choice there as well. This adds friction and creates inertia to continue using Edge despite the user's obvious preference. A well-established design pattern is to allow the third-party browser to invoke a system prompt, which permits the user to easily confirm or reject the request to set the current browser as the default. This is an intuitive user experience that mirrors similar permissions models used in operating systems, browsers, and web applications. Android and Mac OS offer such a capability. Unfortunately, Windows does not support anything like this for third-party browsers. Browsers are forced to deep link into the Windows settings UI. On Windows 10, this requires several clicks and a double confirmation in the settings UI. On Windows 11, there is a Set Default button. Neither is sufficient. Windows should instead provide a method for third-party browsers to programmatically request they be set as the default. And to that, I'll just say, yep, this is the traditional way that we've all historically experienced the addition of a third-party browser being installed. The browser notices that it's not currently the system's default URL handler and asks its user whether they would like it to switch them over to using this browser instead. The user says, yes, please, or no, thanks, and it's done. But no longer. Microsoft, exhibiting the same pettiness we see from Apple and Google, clearly wishes to hold on to the use of Edge every way possible. As I sit in front of Windows 10, I'm periodically reminded of just how much my life could be improved if only I would allow their Edge browser to service my needs. No, thank you. And speak of the devil, here's Mozilla's second complaint. In general, the Windows 10 and 11 operating systems have persistent messaging that Microsoft Edge is the recommended browser for Windows and offer affordances to change the default browser to Edge. In some cases, the wording is misleading, asking a user to adopt recommended browser settings, which does not obviously suggest a default browser change. This messaging is a moving target, with examples added and removed from Windows over time, often on UI surfaces that appear automatically on update or otherwise, making it difficult to enumerate specific examples. Right, so they become quite slippery. In all cases, Mozilla says, these Windows components are able to change the user's default browser directly and are not forced to use MS settings protocol deep linking that browsers are required to use. Windows should consume the same affordances and APIs that are available to third-party browsers for setting to default. Yep. Just another of the many reasons I am perched in front right now of my trusty and crusty old Windows 7 system. You know, I'm subjected to none of that extraneous crap. Okay, and lastly, Mozilla says there are at least 3 prominent Windows features that open URLs in Microsoft Edge and not in the current default browser. The user's default browser choice should be respected when web pages are opened by built-in operating system features. The first is Windows Search, also known as Start Menu Search, and formerly known as Cortana. The UI for this feature is represented by a taskbar search box or search button, depending upon the user settings, and a search suggestions/results UI that appears when activated and updates as the user types. The suggestions and results UI also appears if the user starts typing when the start menu is open and by the Win+S hotkey. All links from this UI, whether they initiate web searches or link directly to articles or results, open in Microsoft Edge, regardless of the user's default browser. The second is the new Windows Copilot, currently only available on Windows 11, which appears as a docked window on the right side of the screen. If Copilot produces links in its responses or offers other links within its rendering area, these links open in Microsoft Edge, regardless of the user's default browser. Third, there are Windows widgets, which are called News and Interest on Windows 10, and a UI surface which can be activated by a taskbar button. These show information like news, weather, stocks, and sports scores. On Windows 11, new widgets can be added from third parties. Regardless, all links to a web page from widgets will open in Microsoft Edge, regardless of the user's default browser. So, okay. In summary, what we have for Mozilla is highlighting and detailing pervasive pettiness and, not playing fair on the parts of Apple, Google, and Microsoft. It's not like they absolutely refuse to accept a default, to accept a browser change. That would probably get them in some serious hot water, right? Instead, it's like, oh, yeah, you can install a browser. And then they do everything they can not to really let the user use the browser, not the way they obviously could if they wanted to. Clearly not playing fair. So, Leo, what do you think is behind this? Is this like gearing up for a little antitrust activity here?
Yeah,
Is Microsoft seeing their market share dwindle?
It's hard to explain because with Edge they had an opportunity in the early stages, and Paul Thurrott's always saying this, to say, hey, we're a better Chrome than Chrome. We're a Chrome without the privacy problems. They've always knocked Google for its privacy plan. This bugs me about Microsoft all around is that they could actually do very well by saying we're a private platform. We respect our users. We keep it private. We have a better browser that's got less stuff. Instead, they put coupon codes in there and all sorts of crazy stuff.
I got shopping crap on. Yeah. It's like, what the heck?
And so they don't need the money, except Apple doesn't need the money by, charging 27% instead of 30% if Kindle uses its own Amazon link. These companies are greedy. I think really what's happening, and we're seeing it again and again, we're seeing it in big tech, but we're also seeing it in our politics, where people go, I don't care if you don't like it. It doesn't matter.
Right.
I'm going to do what I want to do.
You're right.
Screw it, and the heck with the FTC.
Basically abusing the power that they have.
We're going to abuse the power.
They have the power. They're going to abuse the power.
And they no longer care about governments. They no longer care about users. They care about profit. It's very disappointing.
Microsoft knows nobody has a choice. They're like forcing people up to newer versions of Windows, and those newer versions of Windows are increasingly creating lock-in.
The thing that's frustrating is they don't need to do this, and they could do so well for themselves if they said, no, it's a better Chrome than Chrome. We're privacy-focused. We don't need to do all of that. You own the computer. You own the platform. They would, I think, do better by doing that. And so it's baffling.
Look at Chrome's market share.
They're dominant.
My wife has Chrome on Windows 10.
Of course she does.
Because she doesn't, and she keeps complaining about this Bing, and like it keeps binging her. She says, "How do I stop this?" Yeah,
it's unfathomable.
Not working.
Yeah, it's just But I honestly think that these companies have gotten to the stage where they don't care, and they just don't need to. And this is what Cory Doctorow is always talking about with enshittification.
They're too big to care.
They're too big to care. It's time for them to squeeze us. Hey, it's Leo Laporte. I hope you've enjoyed this little snippet from Security Now. If you want the whole show, you can get it at our website, twit.tv/SN. Of course, you can subscribe to Security Now on your favorite podcast, or just click one of the links below.